Hi, I'm Andy Schmuckler. I call this the mysterious disappearance, and the thing that disappeared mysteriously was an idea. It was a um, original, tightly argued vision about the human story and making sense of what's happened to our species in the last 10 or 12,000 years. Putting things in several important things in a importantly different light. It's an idea that took me 14 years between uh, a big transformative visionary experience and that book coming out from the University of California Press and getting a full page review in the New York Times, and then getting a few other big, moderate sized splashes for getting out into the world. So that idea changed the course of my life because I thought that it was sort of hard to find any hole in the argument. I mean, I've never found a hole in the argument. Not a big one that you could drive any kind of vehicle through. But if it were true, the ramifications of what's being asserted about what the human story means and how what we see unfolding in the history of civilization is not really a reflection of what and who we are as creatures, at least in some fundamental ways. It's not, because there are social evolutionary forces at work. Well, I was trained to develop things really compellingly and systematically. That was my father's strength that he demanded in conversation as well as looking at things I might write. Did my best, and I made a case that several reviewers described as compelling. Um, it would have huge ramifications one way or the other. I mean, if it were valid, that would be a big deal, which is why my whole life was sort of turned around as soon as I saw this thing. I got it out there, utilizing all the craft that I had been taught and that I had developed. That version there was written in 2001-2 or maybe 2-3. And it was as good as I was going to be able to be at that stage of my life. And I've lost some steps in some events. So I'm still plenty pleased with that book, and certainly with the idea, which I've expressed since then in a variety of ways you can find on abetterhumanstory.org. Because it got out there, you know, well enough so that the publicists at the University of California said, "Oh, this is what we'd kill to get a review like what you got in the Times." Oh, okay. Um, it got out there. I had made a promise in 1970 to do everything I could to get it out there, so that my fellow human beings could see what I saw, because I think it shows a lot of things differently about what we are and why history's been the way it has and what we got to do. So I thought it was so big that I made a lot of sacrifices, but I feel like it's also been a great blessing to get that. But the experience also brought with it a mystery, a mysterious disappearance. Things continued to unfold, as if maybe It was getting out into the thinking world a little bit, at least. Yet gradually it was disappearing. Now, I was brought up to assume about the way the world works that if you put out something in a responsible way and it gets out into the thinking world, and if that something would have major implications if it were granted to be true, that the thinking world that had had access to this thing, it wasn't hidden under a bushel, would feel compelled to come to terms with it one way or the other, either refute it and say we don't have to think about this anymore because there are holes in it, or all this evidence shows it's false. That would be one thing. Or if it wasn't possible to refute it, then you got to accept it. And then what would happen is what I had always envisioned would happen. If I can get this out into the world, if I can articulate this thing and get it out into the world, and something really big is going to happen. People are going to stop seeing things the way they've been seeing them and start seeing things in different ways, like it's happened sometimes, with an idea like, Darwin's idea. I mean, when I look at the world, I'm not looking at it in terms of what happened in Genesis. I'm looking at it through the lens that Darwin gave us. And I thought that this was going to be similar because it puts the whole human story in a very different light. So, of course, so I believed growing up in my family, if somebody makes some bold presentation that would have big ramifications, if granted, they're going to have to at least keep struggling with it if they don't want to accept it yet. If they want to struggle with it, okay, before accept, that would be fine. I don't think that people's thoughts change all that easily. I think the same guy that gave the Kuhn, the structure of scientific revolution, I think at one point he says something like, new ideas don't replace old ideas by persuading the people, said more elegantly, persuading the people who have the old ideas to drop them and adopt the new ideas. It comes from the old idea people dying off and being replaced by the next generations. So I don't mind... but that's not what happened. I mean, I'll occasionally run into people who have, are you the author of the Parable of the Tribes? But it basically disappeared. There was a time my wife and I were hiking in Yosemite, and she was wearing the T-shirts that we bought, one of the T-shirts that we bought for when the Parable of the Tribes came out. And people were walking up this, whatever it was, Bridal Falls, and people were walking down. And when we were walking up, the people walking down could see her T-shirt. And as it happened, there was somebody who got very excited about it. But really, that was in the 1980s, when the book was still fairly new. It really largely disappeared. Oh, there's also a time later after the book had disappeared where April was wearing the same T-shirt, and we were shopping in someplace in Hawaii, and somebody saw the shirt and said, something about, anyway, turned out to be a big deal. But no, just, for something that I thought when I got it, geez, if I can get this out there, there's going to be a revolution in people's thinking. It just disappeared. People weren't wrestling with it. They had never laid a glove on it. Nobody had found a hole in the argument. No refutation. That's the mysterious disappearance. Haven't known how to understand it. I wonder, is there something in the argument about the reality that I'm pointing to, that we haven't been in control of how civilization develops, at least in very meaningful ways? Civilization's been out of control this whole time, being misshapen by forces that we inadvertently unleashed? Was there something about that that makes us seem like victims rather than the way the Renaissance talked about our what a magnificent thing a human being is? Well, we have been largely helpless. I don't know what percentage to. I mean, how are you going to compare, for example, how free we've been to, say, invent great designs, um, and how unfree most civilized societies have been to give people power, say, over their own future? How do you balance the various things? But in significant ways, the parable of tribes is bad news. And I emphasize that back in when I wrote the intro to that book, I put forward my big idea about social evolution being out of control. I put it out as a humbling thing. That's how it came out of me in the early 1980s. With I started a piece, then I went to the Kennedy Center the other night. It, it, on the way in, I saw these huge doors built as if for giants. We thought we were bigger than human then. So we built entrances fit for giants or something. It was an NPR commentary I did. But there was I presented it as humbling, and therefore maybe too much as bad news. Though after I have the bad news, I have a section called hope, because there are grounds for hope here. And what I've been doing more recently, rather than delivering this, I don't know, Jeremiah is not probably right, but that human beings are not the center of the universe. Copernicus showed it. We're not a whole separate creation, Darwin showed. And now the parable of tribes shows we not even been master in developing our own magnificent achievement of civilization. Maybe it was bad news. But now I express it in this way. The ugliness we see in human history is not human nature writ large. I claim that I can prove things about what's shaped human history that prove that to be true. I'm presenting it as good news. We're better creatures than we've thought ourselves to be. Am I going to be more successful now, getting people to actually check it out and to feel compelled to either refute or accept it, or keep struggling with it and not ignore it? I don't know. I don't understand what happened back in the 90s. And there are a couple of things that might have changed now. I think we've looked more into the heart of darkness since then, are more worried about where we're heading as a civilization. The Cold War ended, maybe that hurt me. I think people, when the book came out, people I think were looking for some way of thinking about the dangerous situation we're in when we've got an intersocietal system in which we might annihilate ourselves. And then by the time it disappeared, it was Reagan and Gorbachev had met at Iceland, and Gorbachev and Bush had reunified Germany, and gee, who needs to worry about the problem of power? It looked like we just solved it. Maybe that's why it happened. I don't know. But it wasn't, that wouldn't be enough to explain it, because um, the Cold War remained going for a while. After the book came out in May of 2000 of 1984, the Reagan and Gorbachev had not yet met in Geneva when all that sort of broke. Um, the Cold War wasn't over really for a while after that, into the Bush administration. But there's another thing that I think might explain it. And I've given this matter a lot of thought. First of all, its disappearance was very disappointing. uh, I thought that I had delivered the goods by getting it out as much as I got it out. And then it turned out, well, you didn't really communicate with your fellow human beings, apparently, because they're just ignoring it. But I thought about the some other things that I've seen over the years about today's thinking world. And it would appear to me that the today's thinking world not only has not bought what I'm selling, it hasn't bought anything else that aspires to occupy that important category as big picture perspectives that illuminate something important about the human world. Uh, I've used Freud's elaborately developed system of interpretation, thought, and analysis. And I've used Marx's, which is also, I don't find it as lucid by a long shot, but it also was a very influential way of understanding the human world. You could look at the things happening around us through the lens of Freud, in which people are doing things they're not fully aware of what they're doing, or you could look at it through the lens of Marx. The class struggle and the tendencies of capital to exploit the proletariat, etc. Those existed as big pictures that were dealt with, cultivated, studied, wrestled with, disputed back in the world I grew up in and first got educated in. But and they've both lost a lot of ground. I mean, for some good reasons. I think in both the case of Freud and Marx. I have there are some major problems, but we used to have things like that in the culture where people are actually wrestling with big ideas. And then I've offered something I'm happy to put up there in competition with those guys. Um, but there's nothing else there either. No, not Freud. He's not what he was in the 50s. Not Marx. He's not what he was in the 30s and the 40s. No, we got nothing. Nothing like that. So it made me wonder Was that possibly part of the reason why the thing made this somewhat splash and then disappeared in the deeps? No more ripples, even not bubbling up from below. I do think that something's changed, and it seems like a very fundamental thing that's changed. And I don't know how something like that would change because it's so fundamental. I don't think that people are looking for the big picture. Maybe they don't think there could be such a thing. Maybe it's, you know, the ones that pretended to the throne have been discredited. So let's not do what with anything what people used to do with Freud or Marx. I don't know. I think it goes deeper than that, actually. I don't think it's disillusionment, but it's, well, I don't know if I know what I'm talking about. I think that people don't envision that there is much more than lots of complexity and lots of specific things, concrete things, one damn thing after another things. I mean, there used to be theories of history that were running around. I don't think, they weren't great. Like Toynbee was so prestigious in a way in the 50s, it seems, in America. Arnold Toynbee with his, but important things were pointed out by Marx and Freud both. Uh, it's not easy for cultures to absorb ideas in just constructive way, and people don't always produce ideas that are so good that their effect on how people think and act is entirely benign. I don't know what we would think of. I basically think that Freud, on balance, contributed positively by letting a human nature come out from the hidden id that Victorian Europe put on it. I'm not sure what to say about Marx. If Marx hadn't become tied in with the Lenin and Mao and all that stuff, all that ugly stuff. But, Marx was to blame for that. I mean, there was a defect in Marx that made it happen, that the dictatorship of the proletariat turns into the Stalinist terror. Marx didn't understand the problem of power. I claim that I wouldn't have made that mistake. But I think that our society has somehow let go of the idea that we can look for some big ideas that capture some essential dimensions of what it is that happens in the human world. I have had the experience of one who has been publishing hundreds and hundreds of pieces on daily costs since I ran for Congress in 2012. After that race, I established the right to post on daily costs, and I've used that platform a lot. I don't know, 800 and some essays of various kinds. In those essays, I've tried to show how the battle that we're engaged in America right now the battle with Donald Trump and the Trump Party and the fascist spirit and the whole of conservative America in a way. We're needing to understand uh, the larger drama that we're involved with. The failure to understand what we're up against, and that's the title of that book up there, has made liberal America incapable of fighting the fight that needs to be fought. So we actually do need a big picture. And when I've written these hundreds of pieces on daily costs, I've made considerable effort to, while having said what I have to say about the immediate and the concrete, which I'm interested in, and which people know how to explore rather productively and interestingly. I've repeatedly made many connections which show the immediate in the larger context and which describe the nature of the forces that are at work, that are at the core of my life's work about a better human story. I have made the connections in those pieces repeatedly. And then in the comments, I have seen that people interact productively and interestingly about the immediate level of things. And it seems like nobody even notices the big picture that I'm trying to allude to. And sometimes make links to this or that, like go visit, please, abetterhumanstory.org. So I think it's possible that something's happened to the thinking of our culture that results in there being no major big ideas like Freud's, Marx's, or anybody else's, because we're all so focused on seeing things in pieces. Uh, Maybe I haven't succeeded better because I'm selling something into a thinking universe which doesn't deal in that kind of commodity of seeing the big picture. Um, I have not felt like people are looking for it. You know, where I came from, big picture ideas, if they were any good, they were like the Holy Grail. I I don't know quite what it would mean not to see things that way. I mean, even my grandfather, who's the tragedy in his life was that he was never allowed to get an education, though he wanted one so badly. But he had a bookcase of people who were these Russian social thinkers from the turn of the century, which was when he was trying to grasp the big picture. And he wasn't very good at it, but my dad was actually a pretty good social thinker, and so I got I'm sort of the heir of a family culture in which seeing things whole is uh, coming up with the ideas that put things in order is a big deal, and I think in fact it is a big deal, just in terms of the practicalities. I mean, America is in danger of falling under fascism, American democracy being dismantled. And the reason, and there are many reasons why this is happening, But one part of the picture is that the liberal world was not able to see things very whole and didn't understand what they were up against and didn't fight the fight that they needed to fight. So I don't know why things went the way they did with the parable of the tribes. I never would have believed that could happen. The world is different from what I grew up understanding, and now that I know that it's different, I still don't understand it. But maybe that's a part of it. Maybe we're in an age of. There was a book back when I began on my life's work called "A Broken Image," about the fragmentation of knowledge and understanding in the thinking world of our times. Where that was 60 years ago. I don't know, how. It does seem to me that we are into seeing the world in pieces. We need to see it whole, and sometimes seeing things at whole shows things about what we need to do, like fight the force of brokenness that's taken over the American right. Fight the battle to make sure that American democracy is not defeated by fascism in the coming general election next November.